We're in Galatians 5. And Paul's still going on here about what these guys are doing. They're pushing them to be following legalism. He said, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. Indeed, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law. You have become estranged from Christ. You who are attempting to justify by law, you have fallen to grace. For we thought the Spirit eagerly waited for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcised avails anything, but faith working through love." Paul starts out here, he talks about, we're free. We're no longer in bondage of the yoke. So when you start talking about a yoke, it's just like an animal yoke. What happens if you have two different animals that are the same, pulling at different times? Don't work, does it? Well, if we're under the yoke, we're getting pulled all the time, aren't we? And we can't follow all the laws. So we're no longer under that bondage. But Paul said, it doesn't prophesy somebody to be circumcised. Following all these laws no longer prophesies as it does it. It's not how you get saved. And if you do follow the one law, then that means you have to follow all of them. Can any of us follow all of them? And that puts you under bondage, don't it? When you have to have all them laws followed, and if you mess up one, you're not going to heaven. But under grace, we're not under that bondage. We're saved. And that's what he's trying to tell these guys. You guys are eager to go and do all these things. But you don't have to. And then he says in verse 7, "You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leaves the whole lump. I have confidence in you in the Lord that you will have no other mind, but he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. And I, brother, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased. I do not wish that those who would trouble you would even cut themselves." So he says, you're hindering the truth from obeying all this and trying to say this is what you have to do. You're hindering the laws. You're hindering the truth that you're saved by grace. It doesn't mean that we don't follow the laws. It's kind of like when you're on a diet. If you eat a lot of sugar, you know the bad things it's going to do to you. So you try to avoid them, don't you? So you feel better. But what usually happens? We break that, don't we? A lot of us aren't always completely into our diet. But we know if we do it right, it makes us feel better. It's the same way if we're following the laws. You actually feel better and you know what you're doing. But are we always capable of doing it? Because when we follow a diet, I know me, if I try to stick to my diet, I don't always do a good job at it. Because like Paul said, he says, I do what I don't want to do, but I know what I should do. That's what we do. We try still doing the right thing, but we're not saved by that, are we? We're saved by the grace. And these guys coming in, their persuasion was to tell these guys, you have to do this. And he used the example of leaven. If you put a little bit of leaven in the bread, what's it do? It makes it rise. It expands out, don't it? If we start adding these little things to you have to follow that aren't really true, what happens? They expand more and more and more. Don't we start putting more legalism in? Don't we start saying this is what you have to do to be saved? We start spreading it more. And as we go along, people think you have to add more, you have to add more. We're not told that. That's not how you get saved. We get saved by grace. You know, he says, my confidence is in God. He made that covenant to us that through the death of his son and resurrection, our salvation's there. But they preach circumcision. And he said there, he says, I was circumcised and everything. I don't tell you guys you suffer persecution for it. You know, the offense is there. It's not offense anymore. But he said, I could wish, in verse 12, he said, I wish those that trouble you would even cut themselves off. In other words, he says he wished they would castrate themselves. He don't want to see that to happen, but he would rather see them go to grace than to fall into going farther and farther. In verse 13, he says, For you, brother, have been called to liberty. Only do you not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this great, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, beware, lest you're consumed by one another. So, they were trying to do everything in the flesh, weren't they? We're not called to do everything in the flesh. That's not how you're saved. We're all one. And how do we show our Christianity? We serve others with love, don't we? We're supposed to love one another. It says there, you should love your neighbor as yourself. We're supposed to be loving others. That means we can't be biting and devouring each other. You know, we can't be consuming one another. What happens when all that happens? You take the direction right off of Christ and you put it on there. You put it away from it, because most people don't want to be around anybody that's being bitter, beating people up, and not being friendly with them. Because then he says in verse 16, he says, then walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And those are contrary to one another, so that you do not have these things that you wish. But if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. So we have to be led by the Spirit. We have to be walking by the Spirit. If not, our flesh will devour us. Our desires will overtake our walk. And that's one of the biggest things we have to be aware of. Because if we don't keep in the Spirit, it's so easy to fall back. If we're not keeping in the Word, we're not following what we're supposed to be. And that's one of the big things. In verse 19, he says, now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, lewdness, adultery, sorcery, hatred, contention, jealousy, outbursts of wrath, self-ambition, destination, and heresies, envy, murder, drunkenness, rivalry, and the likes, of which I tell you, behold, just as I told you in the time past, that these who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So he gave us a big long list there, didn't he? And we usually know when we're doing these things. We know because it's easy to fall into them. The world tells us these are okay. I mean, you just have to watch what's going on in politics right now and all that. You want to see it all working in. I mean, they're devouring each other. It's bad. But we're not supposed to be doing that. Because it says in verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. You know, these are always sometimes the hardest things to do. Because how do you be kind, joyful, peaceful to somebody that's beating you up? You know, we're supposed to put heaps of coal in their head by treating them nice when they're doing bad things to us, aren't we? And that's what we're called to do. And we only can do that if we're in the Spirit. Because that gives us the self-control that reminds us, don't it? And Paul's telling these guys, because what's happening? They're devouring the church from the inside. These guys are coming in. They're telling them to follow all this legalism and that. What are they doing? They're slowly destroying the church from the inside out. What happens to most churches? If you go down through the Bible and you look at all the kings, some of them started out good, but how'd they end up? They ended up bad. Because the kings in the Bible, there's not too many of them that ended up good. It's not how we start the race, it's how we end the race, isn't it? And it says in verse 24 then, and those who are Christians have crucified the flesh with its passion and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. So, as we walk in the Spirit, you know, we can't be judging others. Because if we do, then we start getting provoking them. We can become conceited, thinking we're better than them. Is anybody better? Not a single one of us. Not a single one of us are better than anybody else. We're all at the same level. We're all there together, you know. And don't get envy of somebody being better than you at something. God gave each one of us a gift. And we're supposed to be using that gift. And as we go through, we should be cheering each other on. If you see somebody really selling you something, encourage them. Bring them along. Give them that help. You know, we're supposed to be working together. And that's what Paul wanted. Because this church, he's seeing them all fall apart. Because these guys come in, and they're coming in giving them all this legalism and just destroying churches. And he's telling them, this is what we have to get back to. We have to get back to doing all this. We have to get back to the fruit of the Spirit. And that's what each one of us need to do. As we go through our lives, we need to get back to the fruit of the Spirit. Let's go to prayer.